My daughter, Jessica, sat at my dining room table, a place of 1,000 happy family memories, and methodically poisoned every one of them. She pushed a single insulting check across the polished wood. "After Dad's debts, there's only $5,000 left for you," she'd lied, her face a perfect mask of rehearsed pity. She was so sure of her victory, so confident in my ignorance. I just smiled. She thought she was closing the books on her father's life. She didn't know that I, his silent partner, had written every page, and I was about to add a final devastating chapter in my name only. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Eleanor Grant. For 40 years, I was the co-founder and chief financial architect of Grant & Sons Construction. This is the story of the final and most important audit I ever had to perform, the audit of my own daughter's character. To understand the depth of my daughter's deceit, you must first understand the foundation of truth she tried to demolish. Our company, Grant & Sons Construction, was built on a partnership that was as solid and as carefully joined as the foundations of the houses we built. My husband, Marcus, was the heart of the operation. He was a big, charismatic man with a laugh that could shake a room and hands that could frame a house with an artist's precision. He was the face of the company, the man who could charm a nervous client, soothe a disgruntled subcontractor, and inspire a crew of tired men to give him one more hour of their best work. He was a master builder, a visionary who saw not just blueprints but homes. People loved him, trusted him, and they were right to do so. He was the finest man I ever knew. But I was the company's brain. My name was not on the side of the trucks, but my signature was on every check, my calculations were behind every bid, and my strategy was the bedrock of our every success. I was the silent partner, not just in title but in every sense of the word. I held a degree in accounting, a fact my daughter seemed to conveniently forget, and from a small, tidy office in the back of our very first workshop, I built the financial architecture of our empire. While Marcus was on site turning wood and concrete into beautiful, lasting homes, I was on the phone with suppliers, negotiating prices down to the last penny. I was in the books, managing cash flow with a hawk's eye, ensuring we were always profitable, always stable, always growing. I was the one who structured the deals, who managed the investments, who built the relationships with the bankers and the accountants. Marcus built the houses, but I built the business. We were a perfect team. He never made a major decision without me. He would come home, his clothes smelling of sawdust and honest labor, and he would unroll a set of blueprints on our dining room table. He would talk about his vision, his ideas, and I would listen. And then I would open my ledgers and I would show him how we could make his vision a reality. He called me his secret weapon, his financial genius. He never failed to give me credit in the quiet, sacred space of our life together. But we made a conscious decision early on to keep my role quiet in the public sphere. In the rough and tumble world of construction in those days, it was easier to have a single strong male face for the company. It was a strategy that worked, but it had an unintended and ultimately devastating consequence. Our daughter Jessica never saw me. She saw a bookkeeper. She saw a wife. She saw a mother. She never, not once, saw the partner. This blindness was something we watched develop with a growing sense of unease. Jessica idolized her father, but she idolized a very specific and very superficial version of him. She loved the big, successful contractor, the man who drove a new truck and was respected in the community. She loved the results of his labor, the beautiful home we lived in, the expensive schools she attended, the comfortable, privileged life she enjoyed. But she had a deep, almost visceral disdain for the labor itself. She hated the dirt, the noise, the calloused hands. She was embarrassed by the blue-collar reality of our wealth. We saw this growing entitlement, this dangerous disconnect from the source of her own privilege, and it worried us. Marcus, in his quiet wisdom, decided we needed to build a firewall. Not to protect our assets from the world, but to protect them from our own child. We met with our lawyer and our financial advisor, Samuel Pierce, and we legally restructured the company. I was no longer just a partner in spirit. I was made a 50% silent partner in the legal structure of Grant & Sons Construction. My name was on the corporate charter, a silent, unassailable fact. It was a legal fortress designed to protect my stake, my life's work, from any future challenge. At the same time, Marcus took out a life insurance policy. It was a substantial one, a secret nest egg designed to give me a cushion, a measure of independence should anything happen to him. He made me the sole, unchangeable beneficiary. This is your money, Eleanor, he told me, his voice firm. Not the company's. Not Jessica's. Yours. It's for you, for all the years you put in, for all the credit you never took. These two acts, the partnership agreement and the insurance policy, were his final, most profound acts of love and foresight. They were two hidden pillars, designed to hold up my world long after he was gone. He knew, with a father's sad, clear-eyed wisdom, that the greatest threat to his legacy was not a downturn in the market, but the rapacious, entitled nature of the very daughter he adored. Jessica's condescension was a slow-drip poison, administered in small, almost imperceptible doses over the course of her entire adult life. It was a masterclass in the art of the backhanded compliment, the subtle dismissal, the patronizing assumption. She never saw me as an equal, as a partner in the empire that had funded her entire existence. In her eyes, I was a relic, a quaint, old-fashioned woman who had gotten lucky by marrying a brilliant man. My role, as she saw it, was purely domestic and clerical, a supporting character in the grand drama of her father's success. When she was younger, it manifested as a kind of willful ignorance. She would boast to her friends about her father's latest project, a multi-million-dollar custom home, but if they asked a question about the business, about the finances, she would wave a dismissive hand and say, "Oh, I have no idea. Mom handles the little details, the bookkeeping and whatnot." The little details. The payroll for 50 employees, the negotiation of multi-million-dollar supply contracts, the strategic investment of our profits, all reduced to bookkeeping and whatnot. She was not just diminishing me, she was actively erasing me from the narrative of our family's success. As she got older and established her own career as an interior designer, a career, I might add, that was built almost exclusively on the nepotistic pipeline of clients her father would send her way, the condescension took on a more professional and more insulting sheen. She would talk to me as if I were a child, explaining basic financial concepts with a slow, deliberate patience that was breathtaking in its arrogance. "Now, Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with a false, saccharine sweetness, "I know you're used to doing things the old-fashioned way with your little paper ledgers, but you really should consider getting some modern accounting software. It would make things so much easier for you." She had no idea that I had been using sophisticated financial modeling software for over a decade, that our company's books were a model of digital efficiency. She saw only what she wanted to see, a simple old woman who needed her brilliant modern daughter to guide her into the 21st century. Her attempts to help me with my personal finances were the most galling. She would look at my modest, sensible investments and cluck her tongue in disapproval. "Oh, Mom, these mutual funds are so safe," she'd say, as if safe were a dirty word. "You're not getting any real returns here. You need to be more aggressive. You need to get into the market, into tech stocks, into crypto. Let me introduce you to my guy. He could really make your little nest egg work for you." My little nest egg. The personal fortune I had built through 40 years of shrewd, careful and deeply informed investing. A fortune that was, I knew for a fact, 10 times the size of her own inflated, debt-ridden net worth. I would just smile and nod, a quiet, non-committal smile that she always mistook for senile agreement. I never corrected her. I never showed her my portfolio. I never let her see the formidable financial mind she was so casually dismissing. My silence, my refusal to engage with her condescension, only seemed to confirm her assumptions. In her world of loud, flashy self-promotion, my quiet competence was invisible. The disrespect was not just financial, it was personal. She treated my life, my tastes, my home as a series of quaint, embarrassing, and ultimately disposable artifacts. She would walk into my house, the house her father had built for me with his own 2 hands, and she would survey it with the critical eye of a real estate agent about to stage a teardown. "You know, we could really open this place up," she'd say, gesturing vaguely at a wall. "Get rid of all this dark wood. It's so dated." She was not just critiquing my home, she was critiquing my life, my history, my partnership with her father. The dark wood she so despised was the wood he had chosen, had milled, had installed himself. The house was a living testament to our love, and she saw it as nothing more than a piece of outdated real estate, a project to be flipped. During the final years of Marcus's life, as his health began to fail, her condescension curdled into a kind of predatory concern. She began to position herself as the responsible, capable daughter, ready to take the reins from her frail, grieving mother. She would talk about her father's legacy in hushed, reverent tones, but her eyes held a cold, calculating gleam. She was not mourning the man, she was measuring the estate. She saw his impending death as a transition of power, a passing of the torch from her brilliant father to his equally brilliant daughter. I, in her narrative, was to be a passive, grateful recipient of her largesse, a dowager queen to be pensioned off and managed by the new regime. She had no idea that the old queen was not just the co-founder of the dynasty, but its sole, undisputed and deeply underestimated ruler. Her lifetime of disrespect was about to collide with a lifetime of carefully hidden power. And the collision would be catastrophic. The week after we buried Marcus was a blur of grief and condolence calls, a thick gray fog of sorrow that seemed to have no end. But for Jessica, the mourning period was a brief, performative interlude, a necessary bit of social theater before the main event, the settling of the estate. She gave me exactly 7 days of what she clearly considered to be a respectful grieving period before she made her move. She called and informed me in a voice of grave, businesslike importance that she needed to come over to go through Dad's final paperwork and get a clear picture of the company's financial situation. She arrived at my house not as a daughter coming to comfort her mother, but as a corporate raider arriving for a hostile takeover. She was dressed in a severe gray power suit, her hair pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun. She carried a leather briefcase, which she opened on my dining room table with a sharp, decisive click. The table, the site of 1,000 happy family dinners, was instantly transformed into a boardroom, and she had just appointed herself chairman. "Okay, Mom," she began, her tone a brisk, no-nonsense imitation of what she clearly thought a powerful CEO should sound like. "I know this is going to be difficult for you, but it's important that we face this head-on. I've spent the last few days talking to Dad's accountant, going through the company's books and, well, the news is not good." She paused, her face a carefully constructed mask of somber pity. It was a performance, and I knew in that moment with a cold, sickening certainty that every word that was about to come out of her mouth would be a lie. She pulled out a thick stack of papers from her briefcase and spread them across the table. They were a chaotic jumble of invoices, creditor letters, and what looked like official bank statements, all stamped with bright red, past due notices. "It seems," she said, her voice a low, dramatic whisper, "that Dad was in some serious financial trouble. The company is leveraged to the hilt. There are massive outstanding loans, huge bills from suppliers that haven't been paid in months. He was hiding it from us, Mom. From both of us. He was trying to protect us, I think. But the truth is, the company is on the verge of bankruptcy." I stared at the documents, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and a dawning, terrible understanding. The invoices were from companies I had never heard of. The creditor letters were from banks we had never done business with. The numbers, the figures, the entire financial picture she was painting, was a complete and utter fabrication. Grant & Sons Construction was a debt-free company. I knew this for a fact. I had spent 40 years making sure of it. These papers were a work of fiction, a meticulously crafted stage set for the drama she was about to unfold. They were forgeries. "I've done the math," she continued, pushing a single, neatly typed summary sheet toward me. "After we liquidate the company's assets to pay off these priority debts, the trucks, the equipment, everything, there's almost nothing left. The company is essentially worthless." She let that lie hang in the air, watching my face, waiting for the reaction she expected, the reaction she craved. The collapse of the frail, ignorant widow, the heartbroken woman who had just learned that her husband's life's work was a sham. I said nothing. I simply stared at her, my expression a blank, unreadable slate. Her mask of pity tightened. "I know this is a shock," she said, her voice a soft, cooing insult. "But you don't have to worry. I will handle everything. I will deal with the creditors. I will manage the dissolution of the company. I will take care of you." She then slid a single, crisp check across the table. It was a personal check, drawn from her own account. It was made out to me, Eleanor Grant, in the amount of $5,000. "This is it, Mom," she said, her voice thick with a fake, tearful emotion. "After all the debts are paid, this is all that's left. $5,000. It's all that's left from Dad's entire life's work." She pushed the check closer to my hand. "I want you to have it. To get you through the next few months. And don't you worry about a thing. I'll manage this for you. I'll make sure you're taken care of." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the act was a masterpiece of cruelty. She had invented a mountain of debt, declared our multi-million-dollar company worthless, and was now presenting me with a pittance, a handout, a $5,000 check that was meant to be the final, insulting punctuation mark on my husband's legacy. And she was doing it all under the guise of love, of protection, of filial duty. She was not just stealing my company, she was trying to steal my dignity, my intelligence, my history. She was trying to reduce me to a charity case, a helpless old woman completely dependent on her brilliant, capable daughter. In that moment, as I looked at the forged documents, the insulting check and the lying, pitying face of my only child, the grief for my husband was momentarily eclipsed by a wave of pure, cold, and utterly clarifying rage. The time for mourning was over. The time for war had just begun. My first instinct was to scream, to rage, to take her carefully constructed web of lies and tear it to shreds with the hard, cold facts of our company's balance sheet. I wanted to throw the real financial statements in her face, to show her the proof of her own monstrous deceit. I wanted to see the look in her eyes when she realized that I was not the fool she believed me to be. But then I thought of Marcus. I thought of his quiet strength, his strategic mind, his belief that the best victories were the ones won not with brute force, but with patience and a superior plan. He would not have screamed. He would have waited. He would have let his opponent overplay her hand, let her walk deeper and deeper into the trap of her own making. And so, in a final silent tribute to the man I had loved and learned from for 45 years, I chose his path. I chose to play the long game. I looked up at Jessica, my eyes wide, my lower lip trembling. I summoned every ounce of my acting ability and transformed myself into the very woman she believed me to be. A frail, heartbroken, and financially naive widow, utterly destroyed by the devastating news she had just delivered. Bankrupt. I whispered, my voice a choked, broken thing. But how? I don't understand. Marcus was always so careful. He always told me everything was fine. The look of relief and triumphant pity that washed over Jessica's face was a sickening thing to behold. This was the reaction she had wanted. This was the validation she needed. My collapse was the final, necessary piece of her victory. I know, Mom, I know, she said, her voice a soft, cooing symphony of condescension. She reached across the table and patted my hand, a gesture that felt like a spider crawling on my skin. He didn't want you to worry. He was trying to protect you. But the numbers don't lie. He was in over his head. But what will I do? I asked, allowing a single perfect tear to trace a path down my cheek. The company was everything. It was our whole life. Don't you worry about a thing, she said, her voice now firm, authoritative, the capable daughter taking charge of the helpless mother. I will handle it all. I will take on the burden of the company. I'll deal with the creditors, I'll manage the liquidation. You don't have to think about any of it. Your only job is to grieve, to rest. She was not just taking my company, she was taking my purpose, my history, my role as the matriarch of our family. She was reducing me to a helpless child, a ward of her own state. Oh, Jessica, I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. You are such a good daughter. So strong. So capable. I don't know what I would do without you. I looked up at her, my eyes shining with fake, grateful tears. Please, I begged. Take it. Take what's left of the company. I can't bear to look at it. It's too painful. You manage it. You do what needs to be done. I pushed the insulting $5,000 check back toward her. You keep this too, I said. Use it for the company's expenses. I don't need it. You need it more than I do. Her ego, already inflated by her perceived victory, swelled to a monstrous size. She had done it. She had completely and totally outsmarted me. She had convinced me that our fortune was a fantasy, that our company was a failure, and she had made me gratefully hand over the keys to the kingdom. She saw herself as a brilliant strategist, a financial genius who had executed a flawless plan. She had no idea that she was a pawn in a much larger game, a game whose rules she didn't even know existed. Of course, Mom, she said, her voice thick with a magnanimous, self-congratulatory pride. If that's what you want, I will do it. For you. For Dad's memory. She gathered her forged documents, her face a mask of somber, dutiful responsibility. She was playing the part of the tragic heiress, bravely taking on the burden of her father's failed legacy. She was so lost in her own performance, so convinced of her own brilliance, that she was completely blind to the cold, hard, calculating reality of what had just happened. She had not just taken the bait. She had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. She believed she was now the CEO of Grant & Sons Construction, and she was about to run it and her own life directly into the ground. I had given her the rope. Now all I had to do was wait and watch her hang herself with it. The moment Jessica's car disappeared down the street, the frail, weeping widow vanished. I stood up from the dining room table, my back straight, my hands steady, and my mind as clear and as cold as a winter morning. I walked over to the telephone, the old, familiar rotary phone that had sat on a small table in my hallway for 30 years, and I made my first call. It was time to summon my army. My first call was to Dorothy Hall. Dorothy had been my best friend for over 40 years, and our friendship had been forged in the parallel trenches of being married to driven, successful, and often absent men. Her late husband had been a prominent doctor, and Dorothy, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a mind like a steel trap, had been the manager of a major downtown bank branch for 30 years. She had handled the accounts for Grant & Sons from the very beginning. She was the only other person in the world, besides our lawyer and our accountant, who knew the true financial story of our company. She knew that Marcus never made a move without my approval. She knew where every dollar was, and she knew with the certainty of a career banker that the company was as solid as a rock. She answered with her usual brisk warmth. "Eleanor? I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up, honey?" "I'm holding, Dorothy," I said, my voice low and steady. "But I need to talk to you. Jessica just left." "Oh Lord," she said, a note of weary resignation in her voice. "Don't tell me. What did she do now?" I told her everything. I recounted the entire sordid performance, from the stack of forged invoices to the final insulting $5,000 check. I described Jessica's feigned pity, her arrogant condescension, and her ultimate triumphant belief that she had just successfully swindled her own mother. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, charged, and deeply, deeply furious. Dorothy was a woman who had spent her entire life dealing with numbers, with facts, with the clear, unambiguous truth of a balanced ledger. A lie, especially a financial lie, was an offense to her very soul. That little grifter," she finally hissed, her voice a low, dangerous growl that I knew from long experience meant she was about to go to war. "To do that to you, Eleanor. To disrespect you and to disrespect Marcus's memory in that way. To have the audacity to forge documents and present them to you, the woman who taught her how to count. It's monstrous." Her righteous, intelligent anger was a powerful antidote to my own pain. She was not just offering sympathy, she was offering a co-conspirator's fury. "She thinks you're a fool, Eleanor," Dorothy said, her voice sharp with a sudden strategic clarity. "She has spent her entire life underestimating you. And that is the mistake that is going to destroy her. We are going to let her prove to the entire world who the real fool is." "I told her she could have the company," I said. "I played the part of the helpless widow and I made her believe she's in charge." A slow, delighted chuckle came down the line. "Oh, that's my girl," she said with a grim satisfaction. "You gave her the rope. Perfect. So what's the plan? Do we call the police? Do we have her arrested for fraud right now?" "No," I said, my own plan, which had been a nebulous cloud of rage, now beginning to crystallize into a hard, sharp weapon. "Not yet. It's too quick. Too easy. She needs to learn a lesson. She needs to experience the consequences of her own arrogance. I want to let her run the company. For a little while." Dorothy was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears of her brilliant banker's mind turning, processing the strategic implications. "I see," she said, her voice now filled with a cold, beautiful understanding. "You're not just going to let her hang herself. You're going to let her build her own gallows first. Let her make her own disastrous decisions. Let her create her own documented trail of incompetence. Let her run the most stable, profitable construction firm in this city into the ground, all by herself." "Exactly," I said. "It's a risky move, Eleanor," she said, the cautious banker in her asserting herself. "She could do some real damage." "I know," I said. "But the damage will be contained. And it will be reparable. The lesson, however, will be permanent. She believes she is a brilliant businesswoman. It's time for her to put that belief to the test without her father's name and without her mother's mind to prop her up. Let's see how she does. I love it, Dorothy declared, her voice ringing with a righteous, gleeful fury. It is a thing of beauty. So what do you need from me? For now, just your counsel, I said. And your eyes and ears. You still have friends at the bank. I want to know every move she makes, every check she writes, every loan she tries to take out. Consider it done, Dorothy said, her voice the promise of a loyal, lifelong friend. She won't make a move without me knowing about it. You just rest, Eleanor. You've been through enough. Let us, the old guard, handle this. It's time for the younger generation to learn a little something about respect. With the first member of my war council now officially enlisted, I hung up the phone and took a deep, steadying breath. The next call was to the man who held the keys to the kingdom, the man who held the weapons that would ultimately win this war. It was time to call Samuel Pierce. My second call was to the man who was, in effect, the executor of my husband's final secret will. Samuel Pierce was more than just our financial advisor. He was a family friend, a man of quiet dignity and unshakable integrity. He had been with us for over 30 years and he had helped Marcus and me build our fortune from the ground up. He knew the true story of Grant and Sons. He knew that I was not just the bookkeeper, I was the architect. He had been there in the lawyer's office all those years ago when we had legally structured the company with me as a 50% silent partner. And he was the one who had, at Marcus's insistence, set up the secret $400,000 life insurance policy. He was the keeper of the secrets, the guardian of the truth. He answered his private line with his usual calm, professional warmth. Eleanor, I've been thinking about you. I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Marcus was a giant. Thank you, Samuel, I said, my own voice steady. He was. And he was also a very wise man. Wiser, perhaps, than even I knew. Indeed he was, Samuel said, his voice taking on a knowing, careful tone. I knew he was waiting for me to give him the signal, to let him know that the time for condolences was over and the time for action had begun. I'm calling, Samuel, I said, because the contingency we planned for, the one Marcus was so worried about, has come to pass. There was a brief, heavy silence on the line. I see, he said, his voice now low and serious. I had a feeling this might happen. Tell me what she's done. I recounted the entire sordid affair from the forged documents to the $5,000 check. I told him that I had played the part of the helpless widow and that Jessica now believed she was the sole owner and CEO of a nearly bankrupt company. Samuel listened without interruption, his silence a testament to his deep, professional calm. He was not a man given to emotional outbursts. He was a man of numbers, of contracts, of the cold, hard and legally binding truth. When I had finished, he let out a long, slow sigh. It was not a sigh of surprise, but of a deep, weary disappointment. I am so sorry you had to go through that, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with a genuine, compassionate anger. Marcus saw this in her. He saw the greed, the entitlement. He hoped she would outgrow it, but he was a pragmatist. He planned for the worst. And now I am afraid she is going to get it. The insurance policy, Samuel, I said, my voice urgent. Is it secure? It is ironclad, he replied, his voice firm and reassuring. The payout was triggered the moment I received the death certificate. The $400,000 is sitting in a secure, interest-bearing holding account, waiting for your instructions. It is in your name and yours alone. Jessica does not know it exists and she has no legal way of ever finding out about it, let alone touching it. It is your private war chest, Eleanor. Exactly as Marcus intended. A wave of profound relief washed over me. It was not just the money, it was the validation. It was the final loving act of a husband who had sought to protect me even from beyond the grave. And the partnership agreement? I asked. It is locked in my office safe, he said. The original signed and notarized corporate charter, clearly stating that you, Eleanor Grant, are a 50% partner in Grant & Sons Construction, with all the rights and privileges that entails. It is an unbreakable legal fact. At any moment you choose, you can walk into that company and assert your legal authority as its co-owner. The weapons were ready. The army was assembled. I had my strategist in Dorothy, my legal and financial arsenal in the hands of Samuel, and a secret, untouchable source of funding. Jessica, meanwhile, had nothing but her own arrogance and a briefcase full of lies. "So what are your instructions, Eleanor?" Samuel asked, his voice that of a loyal soldier awaiting his commander's orders. "For now we wait," I said, my voice now filled with a cold, hard confidence I had not felt since Marcus had passed. "We let her believe her own lies. We let her take the reins. According to Dorothy, she's about to find out that running a company is a little more complicated than she thinks." "She will destroy it," Samuel said, a note of genuine concern in his voice. "The company is a finely tuned machine. She doesn't have the first clue how it works." "I know," I said. "But the damage will be temporary. The lesson will be permanent. I want you to be ready, Samuel. When the time is right, I am going to call an emergency board meeting. And I want you to be there with the partnership agreement in your hand." "I will be there, Eleanor," he said, his voice a quiet, solemn promise. "And I will take great personal satisfaction in seeing the look on her face when she finally realizes who you are." I hung up the phone, my heart a steady, powerful drum in my chest. The grief was still there, a deep, resonant ache. But now it was accompanied by a new, powerful resolve. I was not just a widow. I was a partner. I was a CEO. And I was a mother who was about to teach her daughter a long overdue and very, very expensive lesson about the difference between a balance sheet and the bottom line. Jessica's tenure as the self-proclaimed CEO of Grant & Sons Construction was a masterclass in catastrophic incompetence. It was, in its own way, a work of art, a perfect, beautiful demolition of a 40-year legacy, executed with a breathtaking speed and a stunning lack of self-awareness. Dorothy and I watched from the sidelines, a two-woman Greek chorus, as she single-handedly ran a debt-free multi-million-dollar company into the ground in less than a month. Her first act as the new boss was to assert her authority. She called a company-wide meeting, a move my husband had made only once a year, and she strode in like a conquering hero. She announced, with a grave and somber tone, that due to her father's unfortunate financial mismanagement, the company was in a precarious position. She spoke of the need for a new direction, for modernization, for a leaner, more aggressive approach. Her speech was met with a stunned, resentful silence. The men and women in that room were not just employees. They were family. Many of them had been with us for decades. They had known and loved Marcus. They knew him to be a meticulous, honorable, and fiscally conservative man. They knew, with the certainty of people who saw the daily workings of the company, that it was a well-oiled, profitable machine. Jessica's speech was not just an insult to their intelligence. It was a desecration of their beloved former leader's memory. Her next move was to clean house. She fired her father's most loyal and experienced senior staff. His site foreman, a man who had been with him for 30 years and who could build a house from memory, was let go for being too old-fashioned. His lead project manager, a brilliant young woman Marcus had personally mentored, was dismissed for not being a team player, which was Jessica's code for she questioned my authority. In their place, she hired her own people. Her new site foreman was a slick, fast-talking young man from a rival company who was known for cutting corners. Her new project manager was one of her interior designer friends, a woman who knew a lot about throw pillows but absolutely nothing about building codes. She was surrounding herself not with competence, but with sycophants, with people who would tell her she was a genius while she was burning the house down. With her new loyal and utterly unqualified team in place, Jessica set about generating cash flow. Believing the company to be on the brink of collapse, she decided the best way to raise money was to sell off its most valuable assets. She sold 2 of our brand new fully paid for excavators for a fraction of their value to a shady second-hand equipment dealer. She didn't know, of course, that those excavators were the key pieces of equipment for our most lucrative ongoing project, a major municipal contract to lay the foundations for a new community center. The new site foreman, in his infinite wisdom, decided they could do the job with smaller, rented equipment. The result was a disaster. The work fell behind schedule. The quality was shoddy. The city inspectors were furious. Within 2 weeks, we were in breach of the most important contract the company had held in 5 years. The city sent a formal letter, threatening to pull the contract and sue for damages. Jessica, in a fit of panicked arrogance, told her new project manager to handle it. The project manager, who was more concerned with the color palette of the new office furniture, filed the letter away and did nothing. While she was systematically dismantling the operational side of the business, She was also treating its finances like her own personal slush fund. Dorothy, through her contacts at the bank, would give me daily horrifying updates. Jessica had issued herself a new corporate credit card and was using it to fund a lifestyle of breathtaking extravagance. There were $1,000 dinners, designer handbags, weekend trips to spas. She was siphoning money from the company's operating accounts, all under the guise of legitimate business expenses. She was creating a perfect, beautiful, and legally documented trail of her own incompetence, her own arrogance, and her own fraud. Every disastrous decision, every breached contract, every illegitimate expense, was a nail she was hammering into her own coffin. She was so convinced of her own brilliance, so certain that she was the savvy modern CEO saving her father's failing company, that she was completely blind to the reality of the situation. She was a child playing with a loaded gun, and she was about to shoot herself, and the company her parents had spent a lifetime building directly in the foot. The empire was crumbling not from the weight of imaginary debts, but from the dead weight of its new, unqualified, and utterly delusional queen. While Jessica was busy playing the role of the tragic, embattled CEO, I was quietly, and with a deep, satisfying sense of poetic justice, planning my own little construction project. The secret $400,000 life insurance policy, the money Jessica had no idea existed, was now sitting in a new private bank account in my name. It was my war chest, my secret weapon, and I decided to deploy a small part of it for a mission of pure, unadulterated, and beautifully petty revenge. One of Jessica's most frequent and most insulting critiques had always been directed at my kitchen. It was a large, comfortable, and, in her eyes, hopelessly dated room. It had solid oak cabinets, the ones Marcus had built for me with his own hands, durable Formica countertops, and a perfectly functional, if not glamorous, set of appliances. It was the heart of our home, a place of warmth and memory. To Jessica, it was a horror show. "Mom, this kitchen is a teardown," she had declared on more than one occasion, a look of genuine pain on her face. "It's a financial liability. We need to gut it. White marble, sub-zero appliances, a pot filler over the stove. I have a vision for this space." Her vision, of course, was a direct copy of a kitchen she had seen in a design magazine, a cold, sterile, and ridiculously expensive showpiece. She had been planning her own kitchen renovation for months, a project that was, in her words, absolutely essential for her brand, but had recently been complaining that she had to put it on hold because of the company's financial crisis. And so, I decided to build her vision. Not for her, but for me. I did not call Grant and Sons. I did not use the company that was, legally, half mine. Instead, I called the most sought-after, most expensive, and most celebrated high-end contractor in the city, a man named David Chin, who was, not coincidentally, my late husband's biggest and most respected professional rival. Marcus and David had been competitors for 40 years, but their rivalry was built on a deep, mutual respect for each other's craftsmanship. Hiring him was a subtle but deeply significant power move. I summoned him to my home and I laid out the plan. "Mr. Chin," I said, "I want to build a new kitchen. I want the best of everything. I want no corners cut, no expense spared. I want the kind of kitchen that gets featured in architecture magazines. And I want it done in the next 3 weeks." He looked at me, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He knew who I was. He knew who my husband had been. And he understood, without me having to say a word, that this was more than just a renovation. This was a statement. "Mrs. Grant," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble, "it would be my absolute honor." For the next 3 weeks, my house was a whirlwind of quiet, professional, and incredibly efficient activity. A team of the city's finest craftsmen descended upon my home. The old oak cabinets, the ones Marcus had built, were carefully removed, and I arranged for them to be donated to a charity that built homes for the needy. A fitting final chapter for my husband's work. In their place, a masterpiece of modern kitchen design began to take shape. The countertops were single, massive slabs of gleaming white Calacatta marble. The appliances were all top of the line, imported from Germany. The custom-built cabinetry was a work of art. The floors were heated. The lighting was worthy of a museum. It was a spectacular, no-expense-spared monument to modern luxury. It was, in every detail, the exact kitchen Jessica had been dreaming of, the one she had been so bitterly complaining she could no longer afford. I paid for it all with a series of checks drawn from my new private account, the one funded by the insurance money. I paid for it in cash with a fortune my daughter had no idea I possessed. The project was completed on a Friday, exactly 1 month after Jessica had taken over the company. That same afternoon, I received a frantic, tearful phone call from my daughter. "Mom, it's a disaster," she wailed, her voice a symphony of self-pity and manufactured panic. "The city is pulling the community center contract. They're suing us. The suppliers are all demanding payment up front. The whole company is collapsing. I don't know what to do. Dad's whole legacy is going to be ruined." I listened, my expression a mask of calm maternal concern. "Oh dear," I said, my voice a soft, sympathetic coo. "That sounds terrible. Why don't you come over? I'll make you a cup of tea and we can talk about it." She agreed, desperate for a shoulder to cry on, for a soft place to land. She was coming to my house seeking sympathy, seeking a bailout, seeking to once again cast herself as the tragic hero of her own story. She had no idea she was walking into the beautifully lit, marble-clad and deeply, deeply satisfying stage set for her own final, brutal reckoning. The day of the emergency board meeting was a cool, crisp autumn morning. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for a final, decisive battle. I did not wear the soft, muted colors of a grieving widow. I wore a sharp, impeccably tailored navy blue suit, a string of my grandmother's pearls, and a pair of low, sensible heels that clicked with a firm, authoritative sound on the polished floors of the downtown office building. I was not here to mourn. I was here to command. I had instructed Samuel Pierce to book the largest, most intimidating conference room in his firm's office suite. It was a vast, sterile space, dominated by a single massive mahogany table that could seat 30. At the head of that table I took my seat. On my right sat Samuel, his briefcase containing the ironclad legal documents that were the source of my power. On my left sat Dorothy Hull, who had insisted on being there as a silent observer, though her expression was anything but silent. It was the stern, unimpressed look of a career banker who was about to witness a long-overdue foreclosure. And to Samuel's right sat a team of forensic accountants I had hired, their faces grim and professional. Jessica arrived exactly on time, a testament to her own deep, gnawing anxiety. She walked into the room and her stride faltered. She had been expecting a small informal meeting in a cramped office. She had been expecting to see her frail, weeping mother, whom she could easily manipulate and control. She was not prepared for this. She was not prepared for the vast, intimidating room, the team of stone-faced accountants, and the sight of her mother, sitting at the head of the table, looking not like a victim but like a queen about to pass judgment. Her mask of the harried, competent CEO was already beginning to crack. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a little too high, a little too brittle. "Who are all these people?" "This, Jessica," I said, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of the maternal warmth she was used to, "is a board meeting. And these are my advisors. Please take a seat." I gestured to the single solitary chair that had been placed on the opposite side of the vast table. It was a deliberate, calculated piece of stagecraft, designed to physically and symbolically isolate her. She was no longer part of the team. She was the subject of the inquiry. She sat, her back rigid, her hands clutching her designer handbag like a life raft. The confident, condescending woman who had sat at my dining room table a month ago was gone, replaced by a nervous, cornered woman who was finally beginning to realize that she had made a terrible, terrible miscalculation. "I have called this meeting today," I began, my voice ringing with an authority she had never heard from me before, as the 50% owner and co-founder of Grant & Sons Construction, to address a series of grave financial and operational crises that have occurred under your temporary management. The words 50% owner landed with the force of a physical blow. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a stunned, disbelieving shock. 50% owner? She stammered. "What are you talking about? Dad owned the company." "Your father," I said, my voice as cold and as hard as the polished table between us, "was a brilliant builder. But I was his partner. And I am the woman who built the financial foundation of this company from the ground up." I nodded to Samuel. "Mr. Pierce, if you would." Samuel opened his briefcase and slid a single leather-bound document across the table. "This, Ms. Grant Jones," he said, his voice the epitome of professional detachment, "is the original notarized corporate charter for Grant & Sons Construction, signed by both of your parents 40 years ago. If you will direct your attention to Article 4, Section 2, you will see that Eleanor Grant is, and always has been, a 50% silent partner in this corporation. Jessica stared at the document, her face a pale, ghastly white. The entire foundation of her world, the core belief that she was the sole rightful heir to her father's empire, had just been demolished in a single legally binding paragraph. But I was just getting started. Now that we have established my authority, I continued, let us proceed to the final audit. I nodded to the lead forensic accountant. For the next hour he walked her line by painful line through the reality of the company she had been so disastrously mismanaging. He began by presenting the true financial statements of Grant & Sons, the ones I had provided him with. He showed her the healthy profit margins, the complete lack of debt, the multi-million-dollar cash reserves. He proved with cold, hard, irrefutable numbers that her entire story of her father's financial mismanagement was a malicious and deliberate lie. Then he presented his own report, a detailed, devastating account of the damage she had inflicted in just 30 days. He detailed the breached municipal contract and the impending lawsuit. He detailed the illegal sale of company assets. He detailed the exorbitant, fraudulent expenses she had charged to the corporate credit card. He concluded in his dry, emotionless accountant's voice that her actions had resulted in over $500,000 in direct losses and exposed the company to several million more in potential legal liabilities. With each new revelation, Jessica seemed to shrink in her chair. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving only a waxy, translucent pallor. She was no longer the powerful Sue. She was a criminal, a fraud, a foolish, ignorant child whose disastrous game of make-believe had just come to a brutal, public and humiliating end. When the accountant was finished, a deep, heavy silence filled the room. Jessica just sat there, her head bowed, her gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table. She had nothing to say. There was nothing to say. The numbers, her own actions, had condemned her. I let the silence stretch, letting the full weight of her failure, of her disgrace, settle upon her. Then I delivered the final blows. As the 50% owner and, as of this moment, the acting CEO of this company, I said, my voice ringing with a final, absolute authority, my first official act is to terminate your employment, effective immediately. You are fired, Jessica. A small, choked sob escaped her lips. My second act, I continued, my voice softening with a note of pure, vicious and deeply satisfying pettiness, is to thank you. Your recent performance has made me realize that I've been neglecting my own needs. I've been living in the past. So I've decided to make a few upgrades. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. I've just had my kitchen completely renovated. It's a spectacular job. White marble, sub-zero appliances. You would love it. It's the exact kitchen you always wanted. And the best part is, it was paid for in cash by the $400,000 life insurance policy your father left me. A policy you never knew existed. Her head snapped up, her eyes, now filled with tears of pure, unadulterated shock and rage, finally meeting mine. She had not just lost the company. She had not just lost her inheritance. She had lost a secret, second fortune she had never even known was in play. The helpless widow was gone. The quiet, simple-minded bookkeeper was gone. The woman sitting at the head of the table was the one who had been there all along, the silent, formidable partner who had just, in a single devastating final audit, balanced the books and closed her daughter's account permanently. The aftermath of the board meeting was not a fiery explosion, but a quiet, controlled demolition. Jessica left the conference room a broken woman, stripped of her job, her inheritance, and the arrogant self-delusion that had been the central organizing principle of her entire life. She was left with nothing but the debts she had accrued and the public humiliation of her own spectacular failure. Her reputation in the local business and design community was shattered. The story of the brilliant Eleanor Grant, the secret financial genius behind Grant & Sons, and her foolish, grasping daughter became a cautionary tale, whispered at cocktail parties and country clubs across the city. I, on the other hand, went to work. I stepped out of the shadows and into the role I had occupied in private for 40 years. I became the public face and the sole driving force of the company my husband and I had built together. The first thing I did was rebrand. Grant & Sons was a name that belonged to the past, a name that was now tainted by my daughter's brief, disastrous reign. I renamed it Grant Legacy Construction, a name that honored my husband's memory while firmly establishing my own authority. My first act as the new CEO was to undo the damage. I personally met with the city officials, presented them with my plan to get the community center project back on track. And with a combination of my long-standing reputation for integrity and a significant financial guarantee, I saved the contract. I rehired every single one of the loyal, experienced employees Jessica had so cavalierly fired, giving them all a raise and a heartfelt apology. The morale and the productivity of the company soared. But I wasn't interested in just restoring the company to its former glory. I wanted to build something new, something that was entirely my own. With the capital from the secret life insurance policy, the money that had paid for my beautiful new kitchen, I established a new division within the company, the Eleanor Grant Mentorship Program. It was a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and paid apprenticeships for young women who wanted to enter the construction trades. I wanted to create a pipeline of female carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and project managers. I wanted to use my legacy to build a new generation of women who, unlike my own daughter, would never underestimate the power and the intelligence of the woman in charge. The story ends as it should in my kitchen. Not the old, dated room that my daughter had so despised, but the new one. The spectacular, marble-clad and deeply, deeply satisfying monument to my own victory. I was sitting at the massive, polished island, a place that had replaced my old dining room table as the new heart of my home. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the large new windows, glinting off the chrome of the state-of-the-art appliances. I was not alone. Spread out across the cool, smooth marble were a set of blueprints for our newest project, a multi-unit affordable housing complex for single mothers. And sitting beside me, their faces a mixture of intense concentration and excited awe, were the first two recipients of my mentorship program, two bright, ambitious young women who were about to become the first female site foreman in the history of my company. I was not just building houses anymore. I was building futures. I had taken the legacy my husband and I had created, a legacy my daughter had tried to burn to the ground, and I had reforged it into something stronger, something better, something that was entirely my own. I had protected my husband's memory, and in doing so, I had finally and fully stepped into the light of my own power. The books were balanced. The audit was complete. And the future of Grant Legacy Construction, my future, was as bright and as beautiful as the gleaming new kitchen in which I was now planning its construction.